At 18, he had been addicted to philosophy, to knowledge, to the idea that if I just know the right thing, I can find meaning in my life. And so he spent years in his 20s going from one school of philosophy, one teacher to another. He also had another addiction. He was addicted to lust, and at 16, 2 years before his addiction to philosophy, he lost his virginity. And then he spent 10 years with a woman who was his mistress, and with her he had a child out of wedlock. It's time for you to get married. It's time for you to send away that woman, and I will find for you a respectable wife. And he agreed. He said, okay. And so with much gnashing of teeth and tears, he sent away his mistress back home. His mother found a suitable woman for him to marry, suitable for the advancement of his career. But he had to wait a few months before the marriage, and he couldn't wait. He was so addicted to lust, he couldn't wait, and so he broke off the... And then, as he was working this incredible job that he had gotten, he realized how stressful it was. It was such an ambitious sort of job that he had gotten. It was very prominent, and the stress, the pressure of it got to him. And it got to him so much that one day he was walking down the street and he saw a homeless man. And he said, that homeless man is much happier than I. Look at that homeless man. Look at how joyful he seems. And look in my life, how stressed I am. I can't sleep. I'm addicted to all these things. Do you know this feeling? This feeling of coming to the big city from your small backwater town to make it? This feeling of ambition, maybe being satisfied, this feeling of these dark addictions that you carry with you that you can't tell anybody about, addictions to alcohol or lust or drugs, addictions to fame. Do you know this feeling of searching for meaning in philosophy and going from one teacher, one school of philosophy, one religion, one idea to another and never quite finding it? Do you know that feeling? And so our young man, one day, is in the garden of his friend's house in this big city, and he's deep in thought, and then he's over the garden wall, saying, tolle lege, which in Latin means read. And so our young man, Augustine, takes up the first book that he sees, which is a Bible. And the passage that he reads is the passage that we read today in the Romans reading. The passage that ends, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. And then Augustine writes later that he did not need to read any further, that the instant he finished that sentence, his heart was flooded with a light of relief and certitude, and all the darkness scattered away. And in that instant, Augustine's life totally changes. Jesus comes to meet him in that garden, and everything changes for him. The morning is, can this work for us? We just read this passage like, well, one of these passages we read. But is there a way in which we can read this passage and it can do the same thing for us? That it might spark such a deep desire for God that it finally changes our life. Well, let's think about some ways where this won't work. And one way that you can't spark a desire for God is to try harder. Is to tell yourself, if only I were more disciplined, if only my willpower were stronger, I could do this. I could change my life and fix everything. Now, this is a philosophy that appeals often to the type A personalities that make up New York City, the very successful people, the beautiful people, and it is a temptation, an idea that is especially endemic to our Episcopal Church, the church of the successful and the wealthy. After all, J.P. Morgan helped build this cathedral. It's a philosophy that says God made us responsible. God gave us the ability, the potential to be perfect. So if you're not perfect, it's your fault. God made you able to be perfect. Why can't you be perfect? And one of the followers of this philosophy once wrote, it is the easiest thing in the world to change our will so why don't you do it? Now, thankfully, through August's tireless efforts later on in his life when he was a bishop. These kinds of ideas, this theology, Pelagianism, was condemned by the Universal Catholic Church as a heresy. Thank God. Now, maybe another way you think you can better yourself is through good works. Maybe you think, if I come to church, I volunteer, I give my time, my sacrifice, maybe that will get me in God's graces. Maybe that will change my life. But very quickly, and maybe this is true for you, it's certainly true for me, very quickly you go to church, and then suddenly, through these temptations, church becomes not a matter of this open, loving community, but it very quickly becomes a matter of insiders and outsiders. The people who know how to do church, and all of you tourists and washed who don't know how to do church at all. And we see this physically in our Christmas service, the Midnight Mass, when 3,000 people are here. And right up in front, we have reserved tickets for the insiders, for the members of the church. And this idea also comes, and this is an idea that I've been hearing expressed recently in our church, where I volunteer here, and therefore I deserve something. I deserve some thanks. But you know, there is really no such thing. I have 3 little children, and when I first had my littlest, this weekend I have to do all this child care. And she said, when it's your own child, it's not child care. It's called parenting. Sorry. And in the same way, when it's your own church and you volunteer and do things for us, it's not volunteering. It's ministry. That's what it means to belong to a church. That's what it means to be a disciple. So yes, we should thank you, but not to the volunteers. We should say thank you to the people who are trying to be disciples of Jesus. And so these are different ways that we know don't work. Good works, good intentions. And so then what will work? What will bring us a desire for God that completely overwhelms us and so will change our life for the better? And here I now must quote a Presbyterian pastor, Frederick Buechner, who says, the gospel is bad news before it is good news. The gospel is bad news before it is good news. The gospel is bad news for our egos. It is bad news for our pride. It is bad news for our self-sufficiency, for our strength, our discipline, our competence. It's bad news for our self-righteousness. And we must plant this bad news deep within ourselves to shake up our spiritual complacency. All is not well. And what we seek cannot be found within ourselves. And at this moment of maximum despair, now we are ready to hear the good news. And the good news is that our inability to achieve moral perfection doesn't matter. It's not about our perfection. We're able to put on the Lord Jesus Christ. And we can now put on Jesus like shining armor who will then cover over all of our weakness and frailty. And it is the great paradox of our religion that the moment we die to ourselves and we cease trying is the moment that we allow God to resurrect us into new life. And if you don't believe me, if you think this is all just abstract, theological Christian talk with no hard, real-world relevance, I'd ask you to consider the life-transforming power of these different words, not from the Bible. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3, we made a decision to turn over our will and our lives to the care of God as we understand God. 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, we admitted to God and to ourselves and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. 7, and we humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. These are the first 7 steps of the faith to the light after their strips of addiction. And notice how the program does not begin. It does not begin with willpower, have more willpower. It does not begin with exhortations to good behavior. It begins with a recognition of our dependence upon God. Now, Augustine was cured of his addictions to lust and his desire for knowledge the moment he finally admitted to himself that he would never be cured of addictions, that he was powerless over them, that only a higher power could help them. Now, after this experience in his friend's garden, his life didn't get better. This was not a self-improvement mechanism, Christianity. The son he had with his mistress, who he called Adeodatus, gift from God, died. His mother Monica, who had prayed his whole life that he might become a Christian, she died. His future was nothing like the life he had wanted to live when he first came to Milan, that big city, to make his career. He had wanted money, women, power. And now, after the death of all of these desires, he was back home in North Africa, humbled, and now ordained a priest in the Church of God. It's only after a lifetime of these hard teachings that Augustine learns, and that we can learn too how to rekindle our desire for God. We do not make progress in the spiritual life by going up in a vertical ascent, progressively improving. We make progress, such as it is, by going down, by humbling ourselves, dying to ourselves, admitting how utterly dependent we are upon God, whose grace has set us free. And when we have the courage to make this journey and to let all of our desires die, when we in the open to God, then we can say with Augustine in his famous words that open his Confessions, "In you, you rouse ourselves, giving us delight in glorifying you, because you made us with yourself as our goal, and our heart is restless until it rests in you."